that needs to be discussed, for which we have a deadline in December 2017. And this will be an ongoing process, because it is the strength of this institution not to be riveted to a situation which is static, but which has to constantly review its resources, make sure that it is quota-based, so that it is strong and sustainable, and again, that it mirrors the state of the economy. But I'm convinced that in that context, China will play an important role, because it wants to be a player in the institution, and it wants to cooperate in the international domain, playing by the rules belonging to the club. Whatever happens, Chris, and I very much, and you know, this is no mystery, and I've seen it repeated in the British press, I lean towards the let us stay together, work it out, because it's better than to sort of walk away from obligations and from the necessity to have a dialogue and to consider the issues collectively. But whatever happens, I think that all parties should rise above the domestic circle and should have a broader view of what lays ahead in terms of collective endeavor. Because keeping Europe together, after what it has gone through over the last century, and what the risks are on the horizon, keeping it together is actually a huge asset, which is vastly underrated in my view. Well, it's true that despite its legendary reputation of being generally sunny, warm, and I'm sure will be hospitable for the Olympic Games later on this year, there are very, very chilly winds blowing on the country. And with a negative 3.8% forecast, the economic situation is very concerning in terms of unemployment, in terms of inflation, and clearly in terms of potential, in terms of output and potential output. Transfer some of that negative interest impact to potentially the depositors, and raising the concern for savers participates of that particular questioning. But people are not just savers. They are savers, they're consumers, they're employees. And you really have to look at the counterfactual of not doing this monetary policy and the impact it would have on the economy. Wouldn't there be less growth, less credit, less employment down the road? And if the answer to that is yes, then it is worth having that negative interest rates. Certainly not forever, and that is the reason why we're calling for the three-pronged approach. Because monetary alone cannot carry the burden by itself, and it has to be supplemented by the other two, the structural reforms and the growth-friendly fiscal policy, and the use of fiscal space where there is fiscal space, and we believe that there are countries that have fiscal space. Now, on your other questions of the non-performing loans, it's one of the crisis legacies that has not been sorted out, if you will, by certain countries, not only in the Eurozone, and not in all Eurozone countries, by the way. But in Italy, I think the authorities recognize that it's an issue that needs to be addressed. And the most recent scheme devised by the Italian authorities is an interesting approach, which we believe for the moment is limited in size and amount. But if it is, as I'm sure it has been, negotiated with the competition authorities in Europe, then it's certainly an interesting proposal that might have a longer and maybe a bigger life than we think today. China, it's in relation to any issues in life. I think one is better off having a positive rather than a systematically negative attitude. You actually feel better. You know, Chinese growth, as you know, we have reset it to 6.5% to take into account the measures that have been announced by the Chinese authorities under the latest quinquennal plan. But equally, in the medium term, we are also a little bit more cautious, and we are concerned about the medium-term implementation of what you alluded to, which is in particular the state-owned enterprises restructuring. And the Chinese authorities, when I was last in China, have actually indicated their determination to start now the restructuring of some of the state-owned enterprises in various sectors of activity, which I'm sure you're familiar with, whether it's in relation to coal, steel, and various others, but predominantly in the heavy industry sector. And we hope that that is the case. Equally, we hope that in order to stimulate the Chinese economy to accompany that process, the Chinese authorities will resort to ways to improve consumption, to move from heavy industry to lighter industry and services, and to free up certain sectors of the economy, rather than to use the stimulus of additional credit, which needs to be reined adequately.
Information Communications Technologies, ICT, is not just one of the fastest growing industries, but also an important enabler of innovation and development, since the competitiveness of economies in this digital world depends on their ability to leverage new technologies.
The language of this generation is ICT. Everything is being driven by ICT. And for the so-called developed countries, that things are working. Everything is powered by technology. So Nigeria is a large consumer of technology.
That is the key, because we develop from computer just age. We are now in the computer age, and the computer age is the end thing now. On that note, if we advise the youth to embark on, we have software development, we have hardware and other parts of the ICT. As such, if they go and bend down and learn it, it will create job.
It's a shame that we consume so much and we don't produce so much. And our universities, our ivory towers, there is no linkage between the skills and of the graduates that are coming out and the need of the market. Now we need to employ the ICT tool in every part of our lives in Nigeria, so that we can actually develop at a very rapid rate.
According to a statement by the Executive Vice Chairman of NCC, Professor Umar Dambata, the Nigeria's telecom sector's investments since the revolution began is in excess of $32 billion and has contributed over 500 billion naira to government coffers. He also disclosed that the sector has directly and indirectly supported over 2 million jobs.
Right, if you can see now, our youth, most of them are involving in this ICT sector, and I think it can create job. It can create job effectively if we can at least develop more than this.
If we're serious as a nation, ICT remains the tool for our national development. Apart from prudently managing our resources, we know the oil revenue is going down, seriously at an alarming rate. Government is trying to focus into agriculture, mineral development. But what our problem is the system that is so porous. And when a system is driven, purely by people, it's going to be porous. It's prone to, to defects. But when you deploy ICT, just the same way we deployed ICT for TSA, we deployed ICT for BVN, we deploy ICT across all platforms, you will see how much money we'll be able to link.
Experts and stakeholders, however, urged the federal government to exploit the opportunities of ICT as a veritable alternative to crude oil in the quest for economic diversification and development in Nigeria. Jennifer Ugbalo reporting for The Money Show.
Right. Well, from Nigeria's perspective, we are trying as well to be focused, and we're following the quest for growth model. We're a new administration, by the way. We're less than a year old. We've seen for the last 40 years Nigeria a lot of rhetoric about diversification with very little by way of implementation. So we're trying to be much more focused. Looking inward, because of our huge population, the low-hanging fruit, we think, is just in simple things like food. We still import significant amounts of our food. So a lot of what we're doing around the investments in infrastructure, particularly transport and power, are really aimed at export would be wonderful, and we think there's opportunity in export in solid minerals and in petrochemicals, but really the import substitution and the consumer-led growth we think is the obvious opportunity for us. So how do we support that with focus? Well, of course, there are plans around industrial parks, all things that you know, because we don't have power everywhere, and if we wait for power to go everywhere, we probably won't achieve anything. So ideas around clusters, ideas around working to our strengths and looking at our arable land and looking at the opportunities that we have in agribusiness. And of course that creates the jobs that we so desperately need given our young and dynamic population. So I think there is, I mean, it's certainly an objective of this administration, and it's something we're going to measure very closely as one of our deliverables. The brakes on growth are around infrastructure.
Power, particularly.
It's power, it's transport, it's roads. Those are the things that are making us uncompetitive. So the raw materials are there, the opportunities are there, but we've now got to have a very focused approach, and this is around, you know, the disciplined approach of even discipline in opportunity, because I think sometimes Nigeria has an abundance of riches, and you can mention any industry or any product, and we have it, but we're going to be very focused. So there's a lot of focus around things like rice. We're one of the biggest importers of rice. So just being extremely focused around, we want to stop importation of rice and the whole value chain that sits behind it. So the investors, the opportunities are there, and what we've got to do is build the support to take advantage of those opportunities, and we believe that it's largely infrastructure. It's largely infrastructure, and we believe if we solve those constraints, just the domestic market will take, you know, everything that we can produce. We're importing. We import eggs. We import chicken. We're speaking to the World Bank and the African Development Bank for budget support loans. We see the Nigerian opportunity as a policy opportunity, and we feel that the bank is the place to go to support our policy reforms. We're not in this. There's a lot of stigma. I'm trying to be very political, and I'm not very good at being political, so let me just say it as it is. There's a lot of stigma and a lot of institutional memory in Nigeria around IMF that is not positive.
My friends, take note here.
And we believe that that would not be the right messaging for Nigeria at the moment. In Nigeria, have just had a democratic change from one party to another. And I think the general point about democracy in Africa is quite an important one. And I think we're growing democracies, and I think, you know, we'll get better at it. I think the general point, or the specific point about Lamata, because I'm familiar with Lamata, because Lagos is a neighbouring state to Ogun, I think it's, with respect, a fallacy to assume that because something worked in one state, it will automatically work in others. Nigeria is 36 states. Some of them, like Lagos, are extremely urban. Some of them are incredibly rural. So you have to have tailored programs, you know. So Lamata, and it is a fantastic project to decongest one of the most populated cities, not only in Africa, but in the world. But if you take that same project to my state, you will park your buses all day and nobody will get onto them because it's rural. So I think the point being made, and yes, you know, IMF could be a doctor, but for Nigeria, our message is we're not sick. And if we are sick, we have our own local medicine,
yes,
which we will administer ourselves. Yes. We will solve our own problems. But I think it's a good point, well made, and there are good case studies of good work that's been done in PPP, which can be rolled out in other areas. And the thing about good governance is it is a contagion, and there is a lot of peer review among governors. They do look and see what's working, and if it works well, there's an equally good scheme in Abuja, the Abuja Metro scheme, which is based equally with the Lamata scheme. So there is
a lot of that going on.
A lot of that going on. Key, the challenges to non-oil revenue. The challenge. So at the moment we have 5% government revenues to GDP. So it's extremely low. What we're targeting is not even 100% increased, which will take us to 10%. We are very focused, as I explained, my background has been in state government, and so, you know, I'm not a macro person, I'm really a micro person, and revenue is micro. So what we're doing is of course there are risks, and there's no guarantee that we will hit all our targets, but we are working assiduously to ensure that the reforms that we bring in are very real. So, for example, in tax collection, for example, in the last 2 months, they have registered, I believe the figure is 363,000 companies that had never paid any tax. So that's the sort of level of non-compliance that we are tackling. VAT, where we had a difference of opinion, I think, with the IMF around the VAT rate. The VAT rate is only 5%, but the level of compliance is 12%. So, you know, there is low-hanging fruit in revenue collection. We're using technology. We're using, you know, the cashless platforms, and we're very serious about hitting those targets. So, are there risks? Yes. Are we aware of them? Yes. Are we trying to mitigate them in our action plans? Absolutely. The second and third question, I think, are one, which is around sort of investor climate and the foreign exchange policies. The structure that we have is that, of course, that and I mustn't speak on somebody else's beat, is that because we have an independent central bank governor reporting to the Monetary Policy Committee, and they have made certain administrative or demand management measures. They've brought them in, and they are temporary, and they have said this all along. So my answer to the question around what do you say to investors now, my answer is which investors? If we're talking about portfolio investors, I think we should be very careful in Africa about portfolio investors because they have a destabilizing effect on our economies. If we're talking about long-term investors, I think that the compelling business case in Nigeria is such that people or long-term investors recognize the difference between a short-term issue and a longer-term issue, and will make their plans based on the longer-term opportunities that Nigeria offers. And we are certainly in the Ministry of Finance seeing that. When I first came onto the chair, to a man, everybody that came to see us wanted to complain about Forex, lack of Forex, what's happening. In the last month, that has changed to people coming in to say, we have deal opportunity, we would like to do this, how do we go about it? So I think my answer would be the medium-term upside in Nigeria is significant. I think for the first time you have an administration, and this can't be overstated, that is very, very, very keen and very committed to the fight against corruption. And the international community have constantly, it's very interesting how the rhetoric has changed. The international community was almost obsessed with the corruption in Nigeria for at least 20 years. Now we have a leader that's ready to fight corruption. It's all about the monetary policy. Monetary policy is a short-term problem, and it will be solved. Corruption is far more damaging and has been far more damaging and has turned off more investors than the monetary policy challenges. And I'm not saying they are not challenges, I'm not saying they're not real, but I'm saying we really need for Nigeria, for Africa, to look at the bigger picture. And I think my closing comments, I'd like to say that the bigger picture for Africa is a positive one, because I think we've learned some lessons, and we're growing, we're young, and we're late adopters, so we can take advantage of new opportunity, and I think it's definitely a positive one. So tell your investors to make their medium-term plans and come in.
Very.
All right, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for being a wonderful company. Of course, the show bringing you today the deliberations from the World Bank IMF Spring Meeting in Washington, D.C. That's in the United States of America, God's own country. I am Nancy Lu. I hope you have a profitable day. Don't forget to be the best you can be, as well as be the change you want to see. God bless Nigeria. Bye now.